The original tech founder that I referred to is a really, really critical part of what's going on at NVIDIA. But they're still jewels that are relevant. And in this case, I got to say, those jewels outshone even our own, where we were focusing in a different way. A founder is getting an entire team that they would only dream of if they were trying to do it on their own. Canada never been the first country of sale.
So how do you expand into new markets? How do you quickly create new solutions that are viable and interesting?
We also kill ideas really, really fast, even before we look for founders.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Kube here with Executive Conversations. And I have the pleasure today of having Dennis Ensing with us. And Dennis is not only a friend, but he is has been an advisor, a mentor to me. And, we also have some mutual battle scars from doing a lot of angel investing and helping a lot of early stage companies through the angel ecosystem. And Dennis has some deep domain expertise across a bunch of really relevant genres for organizations who are executives who are building B2B enterprise companies from early stage to more advanced all the way to exits. Dennis has a lot of qualities, and it has, one of the things I love about him is his superpower is calm. And I think that superpower has evolved from, Dennis has seen quote unquote a lot of shit in his life, unfortunately, and he has always managed to turn that around and leverage what he's learned from it and maximize it as an opportunity. So with that said, Dennis, I would love for you to sort of take us through your voyage and journey, and then it would be really cool to maybe discuss like some of the cool new things that you're focusing on and go from there.
Sounds like a lot of fun, Daniel, and I appreciate it. Hindsight works great at this stage of life in many ways. And yes, a lot of the things that I did were with intention. I don't mind kind of talking about that, but some of it was a response and a reaction to what was going on around and addressing, both the challenges, but also opportunities. So you and I have had a good voyage together, including breaking bread through our peer scale roundtable. I think that's probably where we first crossed paths, right? Although I never shared a meal with you like some of our other friends did, those dinners.
Great. So Dennis, maybe start, how did you get started? Because you're very financial from an orientation perspective, but you've morphed that into a whole bunch of different leadership roles within, companies of different sizes and scales, and also investment organizations.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think what motivated me primarily was just the challenge, wanting, really looking at where I was. There were things I was interested in, but also challenges. Yeah, I started out as a CPA, which if I think back that far is kind of crazy, but I left public accounting in 1990 to start two businesses of my own. That back then, that was kind of unheard of to be that entrepreneurial. Wasn't common. And then I built the progression of my moves, with the main transition being to a tech business in 1996. And I joined a software company back then that had just raised $5 million of venture capital. So these were pretty heady early days. And that was a lot of money back then. And I guess that's kind of showing my vintage at this point. The transition, as I fast forward through things, the transition that took the longest, that I'd wished I'd made sooner though, was really that one that you alluded to, from finance and ops to the CEO role. I'm now a recovering CPA, but I was a frustrated CFO, COO, and I brought in an executive coach to help me really think through what should come next at that point, and really kind of pushing me to take a big step. And I was at the right stage of life, even family-wise. There were a lot of decisions I had made, I think, early on that were trying to balance what was going on personally with what my career aspirations were. And, I think if anything that comes out of my identity, it's that, is my identity is not caught up with what I do, but it's who I am, and both internally, but also relationally. And that's probably something that you recognize in how we've journeyed together as well.
Yeah. So, while you were building these businesses, the interesting thing I see beside you is your bike. When I first met you, I think you were not definitely riding a bike. I think you were going to McDonald's more than riding a bike. I think you were about twice the size you currently are, I think. And was that a result of working too hard on startups and early stage businesses?
No, not at all. You know, the funny thing is, one of the roles I had that you probably don't even remember, or I might not have ever shared with you, I was the first CFO at Good Life Fitness Clubs. I don't know if you remember that. And I was late 80s. And I can talk a little bit about what I learned there and kind of how that went. I was there long, but I actually got in good shape. I lost at that point, fatherhood I weight with my wife as she had 3 kids, except when she had the child, of course, she lost the weight, and guess who didn't? So I ended up at that point, for a lot of reasons, taking on this role with this really fast growing business. And Patch was, he was an amazing entrepreneur. Believe it or not, back then, our goal was to get to 50 clubs, and Good Life is now over 450 in Canada. So, kudos to him and to them. But I got in pretty good shape back then, and did appreciate the connection between my physical well-being and how I performed on the job. But yeah, life takes over, and I'm there and trying to be a good dad, and then also still trying to enjoy my life. I just slipped into bad habits, and a lot of it, I think, for me, and I'll just be open, the frustration was satisfied through eating and snacking. So it wasn't McDonald's as much as of a bag of chips sitting at the TV at night. So I peaked at 320 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah, that was 2013. And my wife had just gotten a set of books and said, I think we should do this diet. I said, no way. You can't make me do that, But then going back to the executive coach, this was kind of honesty time with myself, because one of the first questions that the executive coach, the first times he put me on the spot, he said, what thing you can change that you need to change right now and make a big difference? And that was when I verbalized that I was out of shape, I was overweight, and it wasn't no health concerns, Daniel. My no glucose issues, my blood pressure was great. Even back then, my resting heart rate as an unfit 320-pound person was only 60 beats per minute.
Oh, wow.
And so, there was nothing fundamentally out of whack. I just felt crappy. And so I said to him, yeah, I got to lose weight. And I wasn't even thinking career. For some reason, that was the first response. And so I went home, this would have been a few weeks after she showed me the books, and I subscribed to the Eat Clean diet, and I lost 110 pounds in 13 months.
Wow.
And that wasn't from riding the bike. That was just from making better choices about what I took in. And I still eat that way. I still I have different habits. My body fuels differently. And then, in the middle of all of that, I did join a gym, which was important to convert that flabbiness that I was dropping into muscle. And the next big challenge I took that year, once I lost the weight, was I started doing some triathlons. And that to the passion for me.
Yeah. So during this time, when maybe talk about, I'd love to hear some of your successes and challenges when you're building some of these companies, because you've been chairman, you've been operator, you've had to swap out executive teams. What some of the tempering moments that really gave you, I guess, the catalyst to create your new passion for some of these venture labs? Because I know the work you're currently doing, you have a lot of passion around it. And I think a lot of that's been driven by a lot of the gaps that you saw in the past from the way companies had to grow and learn. And also just the constant rate of changes. Maybe talk about that evolution and what you got you some of the current engagements you're working on.
I think by nature, I've always been both someone who loves change and embraces change, and I change, and I'm a problem solver, and I don't think, and also try to approach a lot of the conversations really the win-win mindset. I'm not, when I from a negotiation perspective, from a relationship perspective, I win, somebody has to lose. That's not a good outcome for me. And I think that's an important, as you asked the question, I realized that's probably an important characteristic to how did we accomplish what we did? Because it took bringing together, and necessarily mediating, but it's bringing together elements that otherwise had natural conflict occurring because of their own agendas. And I think to some extent, the work that we did on the Angel Group with reflection of all of the things I've just said, now that I realize it, and one of which was change. We needed to do something differently with how entrepreneurs were accessing the early stage angel fundraising ecosystem here in Southwestern Ontario. Overall, it was broken. It wasn't working well for entrepreneurs. It wasn't working well for investors. So how do we do that? But the solution really required people to cooperate in ways they'd never cooperated before. And it's not like high net worth individuals and accomplished people like us don't have egos and have opinions. And so, really, that was a hard journey to navigate. But in some ways, just, you'll remember as we navigated that, these characteristics that I bring that I like to operate in really, really come to the fore. And so in a lot of cases, I like to find where the common ground is and build from that point. And in many ways, it really represents how necessary for everybody here to feel like they've not just been included, but how do we find ways to bridge the gap? And a lot of it is translation. There's a lot of things lost in translation and egos. That part, in some ways, for me, it's the journey to those things that has been way more interesting than just the outcome itself. And I think that's another aspect of my life that's been really, really, which is I just enjoy every day, every week, every year. The journey is important. The legacy I leave is incredible. And if there's some financial outcome or win at the end, that's even better.
Mm-hmm. So maybe talk to us about, because I think currently you're balancing, how many roles are you currently juggling? You're still involved actively in a couple of companies. You're involved in a couple of these venture labs. You're still doing some advisory with Mars. How do you manage that?
Interesting. I think at one point you phrased this question to me what does typical day look like in the life of somebody who's retired, if I remember correctly? Or, most folks dream of a quiet retirement. And I've called this stage a better vintage than I've ever had before. And this is my chance to put in that plug line that I shared with you a while ago, which is I have no intention of arriving in heaven well rested. And so I think right now I just have way more to offer than I've ever had before. But I work differently. My day, the only thing that's probably typical of every day is the bike. So you've already highlighted the bike. I still, this morning, I went out for about an hour and a half, did a 50-kilometer bike ride with a friend of mine. If it's nice enough outside, that's what I do. If it's not nice outside, I do it on a trainer in my garage online. So I spend time in the video game business. We haven't talked about sort of some of the specific elements of my entrepreneurial journey, but these days, my video game outlet is actually Zwift, which is an online training platform. And I have a whole bunch of friends that I get together with every morning that I'm on the trainer, who I've never met in person, but I still call my friends and community.
So Swift's like an open source Peloton, right? Is it equivalent or?
Yeah, so Peloton, if you're into spin classes at a gym, Peloton is your platform. If you're a road cyclist and you enjoy being outside riding, Zwift is your platform.
Okay.
Zwift has group rides. I actually lead group rides. So if there are cyclists out there that want to ride with me, 7:05 Tuesday mornings, it's the Dirt Rolling Thunder Ride. Dirt stands for Dad's Indoors Riding Trainers. You get to ride for 90 minutes and engage in some really, really fun conversations. So
that's cool.
I hype people up like the Peloton coaches do. It's not a spin class, but we have a lot of fun, and we actually have some really good fitness outcomes that come from it too. So that's about the only typical part of my day is, but what really gives me the ability to juggle probably a half a dozen roles is I think that's the entrepreneurial part of me still loves the variety. I love, and a lot of it is just the variety and having a half a dozen conversations a day, which are people just saying, hey, I'm wrestling with this. And it's not consulting. In many ways, that's the strength of where I am today, which is it's a bunch of stories and experiences that I can draw on, which could be relevant to that founder in the situation that they're facing. As soon as I slip into consulting mode, I think I enjoy it as much. And I don't know if the input or advice that they get is nearly as relevant either.
So maybe, saying that, calm is your thing and you've been able to overcome adversity. Do you have any like tipping point moments that were incredibly challenging that you reflect upon now that just saying like that really transformed the business? You mentioned you really like to change and get things done. And I know some of your businesses went through some adversity, but they came out on the other side of it in a very positive fashion. Can you talk about some of those scenarios in which you learned and, how would you leverage those lessons moving forward, especially in, the new world of incredibly rapid change?
Wow. Yeah. I'm trying to think, probably like this is probably a good time to talk a little bit about Trans Gaming, which was the video game platform, because I'm not a founder, but I was an early part of the executive team. And this was a great story of a technical founder that had a really novel solution to being able to develop video games on multiple platforms. And so I won't get into the technology of it, but rather than video game companies, setting up a team for every single platform that they wanted to release a video game on, our technology enabled actual, not black box, but platform to platform capability operating. But what he recognized was he wasn't a business person. And so the first executive he added was a CEO. And then later on, I joined as CFO and COO. And the reality was the first piece of technology was written for Linux. And there's a whole bunch of stories in there for bootstrap founders on how to maximize what you have in terms of runway. And we're generating, and this is part of it, we were generating over $1 million of recurring revenue from Linux users subscribing to a tool set for $5 a month.
Wow.
Right? Which was,
That's crazy.
That was a really important element, though, to the business. But the real dream was to be a development standard. But there was still a bunch of R&D to do. And when we did that R&D, we realized that we couldn't really do total develop once, deploy many times. There was just too many nuances in some of the complicated platforms like PlayStation where that didn't exist. But what we did figure out was that we could do anything that was Intel based. And the proof of concept, the technology proof of concept, the breakthrough was in 2005, Harry Potter, the game. And I renovated my office. So the video game cover that we then was up on my wall, and it's not anymore. But Harry Potter, we didn't demonstrate, and Bing Gordon, who was the co-founder of Electronic Arts, demonstrated Harry Potter running on a Mac.
Wow.
At WWDC, the Worldwide Developer Conference. And that was such an amazing breakthrough moment. And we really thought at that point we had, that we were going to own the game development world, which wasn't entirely true. Yes, we could enable games to run on a Mac, but that was because those Macs were now Intel based in their architecture. But behind it all was an amazing desire to say, hey, maybe we can enable the PlayStation, and Microsoft's not going to want us to enable the Xbox. Although, PC to Xbox was a natural use of the technology we had. We kind of dreamed and said it would be great to have our own global footprint, which was one of those hairy, audacious goals. And so a few years later, Intel did come to us and said, hey, we're coming down market targeting consumer electronics devices, and we have this tech stack and a chipset that has, guess what, at its core, Linux. And so we know that no one develops for Linux, but one of the main applications people want to run, if we're going to go to cable companies, set-top box manufacturers, IPTV companies, TV manufacturers, and market this chipset, they're going to want to run video games. And there's only one company on the planet that could enable a big library of content very, very quickly to run on Linux. It's kind of funny how we go full circle back to sort of that initial tech. And that became our global footprint of devices.
Wow.
And that was that big transformation that happened with both setting a goal and leveraging the relationships and partnerships that we had. Did we influence Intel developing that chipset? No. But boy, were we in a position to take advantage of it when it came. And so now we became a cloud video game company. The relevance to your question, though, is what do we do with some legacy pieces of business? And the reality is we were, a lot of the top video game publishers of AAA games were our customers, but that was a services-based business. Now we had this opportunity to actually build a commercialized platform, and the content was different, it's a different chipset, but it's also family friendly. And as it turns out, it's actually a much bigger market than the AAA market would have been. And so we had to make some tough choices around what were we going to focus on, what were we going to do with that legacy technology. And one of the stories I can share publicly is that inevitably we found somebody interested in that legacy business, and we get credit for setting up NVIDIA here in Canada, in Toronto. They had a half a dozen people spread across the country, but they bought that legacy technology and took 15 of my people, and now have built up an office in Toronto of over 100.
Are those people sending you Christmas baskets every?
Oh my gosh. I mean, honestly, I wished I was an engineer. This was 2011 or 12.
Wow. And they're still there?
NVIDIA, like within 6 months of the transaction, they were all millionaires because
Wow.
NVIDIA went on a run. I don't even want to, they are now, right? That
Insane.
It was an amazing transaction for them, and particularly for our original founder. I think I take huge satisfaction in knowing that, you know, the original tech founder that I referred to is a really, really critical part of what's going on at NVIDIA.
Well, he's still there.
He's still there. Yep, he's still there.
Awesome.
And he was set as a result of being in the right place at the right time, and he got to play. He got to cool tech. And they were interested in his original vision was something that they were buying into for a different outcome, but then they just expanded his scope significantly. So,
and he gets to work with Jensen, who is very culturally aligned to the way you think as well. So
and he did work closely with Jensen too, by the way. So yes, that's not just saying that casually. He's a bright guy.
That's awesome. So even when you discard assets, they become
flourishing
gardens.
That's back to the win-win thing, right? Which is, that was not the growth business. And we had made decisions about where we wanted to grow and where the opportunity was for the company. I think it's important when you've got that, and call them redundant assets. Yes, technically, but they're still jewels that are irrelevant. And in this case, I got to say, those jewels outshone even our own, where we were focusing in a different way.
So you learned, so now I'm sure you're thinking about a divestiture. You think about it a bit longer.
Timing is everything. And that was an important transaction for us to set ourselves up for that growth market, financially as well. So I don't have any regrets other than, as I said, I wished I was an engineer and not a finance wonk. So I didn't get any NVIDIA stock, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's still an incredible, awesome story and great, right? And the other thing about it is that talent's still in Canada.
Yes.
Right, which is really important.
Yeah, and the other really nice part of that story is that, and maybe this is, you know, the one element that I also recognized about myself was that I had blind spots. And, you know, you talk about calm, but part of being calm was not being surprised, but also trusting other people. And one of my blinds was HR. One of the things that I did that I thought was really critical at the time was to include HR at the executive table. And Andrea back then just said, why? And I said, because when we make decisions strategically, sometimes I will forget, or because of that blind spot, not be thinking through the people issues well. And so she ended up, through that transaction, being responsible for all NVIDIA employees outside of Santa Clara.
Nice.
right? And so not only did the CTO, in terms of positionally, but there's somebody who did go through a bit of a transition with me and a development exercise around strategy, but that growth led to an opportunity that she could never have been hired into at NVIDIA. And then the workforce outside of Santa Clara in North America is pretty big. And so I was also thrilled with her outcome.
That's awesome. So, Dennis, another thing that you have a ton of experience in and is helping organizations think bigger, and one of the things that you've done a great job is bridging the Canadian-US border, but also going, global. Much like you and I, our companies have always been more successful outside of Canada than inside of Canada. But if someone is watching this or struggling with market expansion, what would be some triggers you would say? Like even to this day, I think you spend a significant amount of time in the U.S., specifically Texas. But
well, I have 4 grandkids now in Texas, so yeah, that has nothing to do with marketing and sales. Other than Texas did a great job recruiting our son and daughter-in-law out of California. They were in the Bay Area. I always loved the fact that they settled after they graduated from college, because that's Brittany in the US. But after they started their careers in Washington, D.C., they inevitably ended up back in California where she was from. And it was right in the Bay Area. And it was perfect for me. This was post-trans gaming. But every time I went, I also set up a whole bunch of meetings, primarily in the investor ecosystem, but also other business people. But in the beginning of the pandemic, it just got too much for them, and they are happily resettled in Texas. So Texas did a great job marketing to them. But now I think the answer is, my wife says she takes credit for this, but she says, when you were a finance wonk, back to those CPA days that we talked about, you were introverted. And I don't think a reality is I'm way more extroverted now. Was back then in that sort of simple way about those two extremes, but I thrive on networking and making connections in a really significant way. And there is not nearly enough business in Canada for any tech company, but also most companies. And so in any of our businesses, Canada has never been the first country of sale. Rogers is our biggest cable company.
We lost Dennis.
You're
back. You're back.
Back.
Yeah.
Okay. Where did I leave off?
I think you said Canada's never been your number one focus or something like that.
Okay. Canada was never the first country that we would think of selling product into. Even in the video game days, when we were looking for cable company partners, Rogers wasn't on the top 10 list but it wasn't even close. It wasn't big enough, despite how its size in Canada, but it also did not have characteristics.
So you focused on the US top 10, or was it a global top 10?
It was global. No. Our flagship customer was in Paris. And it was both characteristics of their distribution, but also their characteristics around adopting innovation. Those were more important pieces, but they also had 3 times as many subscribers as Rogers did. So it was really important to us find the right kind of partners. And so I think naturally on any business that I've ever been involved with, either as an entrepreneur, as an investor, or as an advisor, it's always another market, and usually the US market, that everybody is selling into first, because that's where the market is.
So where did we leave?
So the thread, I've lost the thread on that question.
No, I think it was just talking about talking to Canadian companies
globally, yes.
Globally. And I think that theme of thinking globally is even more important today. And I think it leads to a couple of different layers in an organization. If you're an executive, you need to think about, and I'm just, sort of passive plug for what we do here, is with tariffs, the ability to transform your business is more imperative than ever, because you need the ability to create new offerings and solutions for new markets, because literally overnight, there are new barriers that you never saw before, right? So how do you expand into new markets? How do you quickly create new solutions that are viable and interesting? So, I think that agility is something that's really, really important. And I think one of the coolest things going now with the agility is, AI enables agility like we've never seen before, because there's so many aspects where it can create massive lift in productivity. I mean, there's still a whole bunch of razor edges you have to be careful with AI. Like I find, like specifically with us, we find, you're doing great iteration with new creation, new products, and you have this blind faith that it continues. So version 5 is beautiful, and all of a sudden you launch version 6, and there's weird, crazy hallucination going on that if you posted any of that information, you would probably get sued. And just because you're so enthusiastic about capability, you lose that rigor as far as reviewing the information. But that the agility that AI brings to expansion and that requirement for businesses, I think, is huge. But it's really changing the governance model that you really need to employ now. But on that note, Dennis, I know you have some really cool opinions about AI and also the venture lab stuff. And I think, venture labs are a relatively new phenomenon in Canada. I mean, it's been going in Europe a long time, and I know in the US. I'd love to get your thoughts on how that helps companies. And also, one of the things I like about venture labs is how they also do partnerships with leading organizations to get stuff done. So it's not only about startups, it's about enterprises embracing venture labs to help them solve some really hard challenges and problems. I'd love for you to talk about that and, where you think the opportunities lie, both for entrepreneurs, but also enterprises.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you're calling a venture lab, we call venture studios. So I'm going to talk about them as a venture studio, which is the category that we think about. And I'm involved in, I'll characterize 2 of major initiatives right now, both as venture studios. One is FutureSight, which is a kind of a classic venture studio where we either look for founders, exited founders, that's a key condition for us, who are looking to write another story and have a problem that they've ideated on, and they want to look for a partner to help them accelerate it. But I also am working on the impact side, working with founders who are more motivated by a bigger purpose, solving a social problem, more so than looking for a financial outcome. But the characteristics are similar. In the world of venture studios, there are, and the teachers' pension plan here in Ontario, being one of the biggest, if not still the biggest pension plan in the world, has a venture studio, which is kind of cool because they're in that camp of ones that are, what they set it up for really was to say, how do we help our portfolio companies in the pension plan solve for some problems with innovation that they can't really do in-house because they don't have the ability to think that creatively, right? And we all know that entrepreneurs innovation so much more effectively than a lot of intrapreneurship, right, that goes on in big companies. So teachers recognize that. So they set up the venture studio, and they're recruiting founders and giving them an instant customer, in your example, that portfolio company as a key partner. At FutureSight, now as much as we do still look for founders with ideas, we are actually generating more of our own ideas now. So we're doing a lot more studio-led ideas, and we're recruiting founders for a specific playbook that we've developed. So we've ideated, validated, we've built the playbook, we've had customer discovery, we might even have done some initial, MVP product development. And we can would have taken a founder months to assemble. We can recruit them into it and say, now go sell it, right? Go sell it, go build it. And we partner with them equally. We usually look for 2 co-founders. We want a CEO and a CTO in simple terms. It could be different than that. And so between the 3 co-founders, FutureSight and the CEO and CTO, there's essentially equal ownership of the new business, who's then with our capital going to drive to a first more formal round of equity. These are all still pre-seed, Daniel. These are earlier than angel investors. And in some cases, some of these businesses are next pitching to angels because that's how early we are ideating and spinning off these companies. I love the model, and I joined FutureSight last fall. I like it because we also kill ideas really, really fast, even before we look for founders. And, these days we have a weekly meeting. We're probably looking at 5 or 6 ideas, and we're killing all but 2 of them. We want to allow a couple to carry forward. And then, as we validate them, we have some pretty ambitious kill criteria along the way. So anything that emerges out of that with a full playbook is pretty attractive to the founders that we're looking. On the impact side, we are primarily looking for founder-led visions, burdens, purpose, whatever you want, however you want to characterize that. And we are, the similar piece to it is we are bringing more time and talent and connections to those entrepreneurs than we are necessarily capital. And I think that's what's the major drive behind the success, both the attractiveness and the success of venture studios, is that there is like an entrepreneur, a founder is getting an entire team that they would only dream of if they were trying to do it on their own.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're driving at. It's been a very effective way to see some really cool innovation get off the ground, because we can accelerate the efficiency. Not only does AI, and by the way, FutureSight is focused specifically on B2B vertical SaaS powered by AI. So there's already all of the efficiency that AI is really bringing, but now we've got the efficiency of the studio model as well. So the speed to market is something that we could only have dreamed about 5 to 10 years ago.
Are there ways, I mean, put your CEO, enterprise CEO hat on. Are there ways involved with these studios?
Yeah, and it's a great, like these days, so the downside of AI is that, and call it a downside, everybody thinks they can develop a tool that leverages a model, right? That solves a problem. And the reality is it's not hard to create wrappers and to do some simple things. And the problem is, as an enterprise CEO or as an enterprise team in a more legacy business, you are inundated. When we used to do B2B sales, how many people show up to do a presentation, right? A couple. Yeah. When they're looking for, some competition for a particular application or a piece of software, not that long ago, you and somebody else might show up. These days, it's frothy. And part of the problem is that's created a lot of fuzziness. So CEOs go, yeah, everybody says they can solve different types of problems. Which are the right ones to solve? Who's real? Who's not real? And I think the reality is, as opposed to just the tech geek sitting in his basement or bedroom, fooling around with great technology and coming up with some interesting applications of it, versus a venture studio that's robustly considered both the customer needs, building a full business around that, and thinking through the go-to-market and the competition and the specific problems that we're trying to solve and putting capital behind it. I think that's part of what they can do when they're looking for partners to solve problems, is look at where that technology is being birthed and what kind of robustness has gone into building that business.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, a lot of the things you're talking about, we're actually writing, I think, a blog that's coming out today that discusses one of the challenges with AI is just the tidal wave or tsunami of information it has created that's targeted to enterprises and individuals, and distilling that information down to what's real and relevant is really, really hard. So, things like going to face-to-face real people events has more impact and value now than ever. The analysts who think about this stuff all day long and actually see demos of everything are more impactful and valuable than ever, just because it's almost impossible to keep up with this rate of change as an individual, right? So, where do you source that information and how do you determine what's true, right?
I think, yes, there are tech experts out there. There's definitely guidance that can be sought, but the source of the innovation, and whether it's a venture studio is early, venture capital is coming in later. And so venture-backed, our goal is to build some venture-backed companies through some really, really early customer adoption. That's the place for a lot of people to try to see some signals from the noise, is understand, what's the source of the solution that's coming my way.
Awesome. Well, Dennis, I think we're going to need to have a second session because we're sort of, because there's so many things I want to cover and discuss because we have so many common threads. But this has been.
I'd love to do that. I haven't even talked about the impact side, which is really, in many ways, a big part of my passion these days.
For sure.
As much as I love spinning off companies, I did, and this is maybe the jumping off point at some point, but, in those days when we were doing some angel investing together, I did end up with a dissatisfaction just around everybody just constantly looking for the next home run. We were filtering opportunities around, the capability to create a home run. And I started to think, you know what, there's got to be something more meaningful to actually solve for that's not just financially driven. And so that became the journey that I went on a few years ago, just around solving the world's greatest problems.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that list is getting longer.
Yeah. But Bruce Cockburn used to sing a song. Oh, he probably still does. But one of my favorite songs Bruce Cockburn wrote many years ago was, "The trouble with normal is that it always gets worse."
Yeah, if we're going to quote songs, one of my favorite songs is Iggy Pop "Passenger," right? You don't want to be a passenger. Yeah. Anyways, you want to be active, to your point of like having an impact. Yeah. But with that said, let's end it here. We will do a part 2 because I think there'd be an awesome, especially talking around some of the impact stuff.